And thank you, Dean. I really appreciate the intro and the welcome thoughts here. So I'm going to start to share my screen here just so we can see what's the slide deck. And of course, please let me know if there's any problems with that. Otherwise, I assume you guys are seeing my slide deck right now. Perfect. So let's get right into this. I wanted to first do a little bit more intro, a little bit of background about who I am. It's kind of an interesting series that you guys have here, and it's also a little bit different than the typical thing that I do. I am typically speaking at technology events around the world. So those are, if you think of it like your Microsoft conferences, we used to be things like Ignite, which is actually going on right now virtually, incidentally, but also other types of Microsoft community, usually community events around the world. In fact, actually, one of the in this slide here, if you take a look, the green dots are locations, different communities that I've spoken at around the world, with larger dots indicating more events in particular areas. So it's kind of a heat map, essentially. So I've been fortunate over the past couple decades to be able to have the opportunity to get invited to these different events all around the world. And to also to meet all the interesting people and the fascinating cultures that make up this big blue marble of ours. It's really fascinating to me the way that different cultures and different people approach problems, and at the same time have the same issues that they're facing around the world. Of course, I view it through the lens of information technology, but in terms of business as a whole, we're all humans. We all have similar needs. We just take different approaches in the way that we address things. So I've been working for the past actually 20 years this month at Convergent Computing, as Vivian mentioned. That is a local consulting company. So we do a lot of IT work. We do infrastructure. We do cloud-based deployments. Office 365 has been recent, as well as Microsoft Azure. So we're heavily involved with our partnership with Microsoft. A lot of the things that I do are Microsoft focused. That doesn't mean that that's the only thing I do, and I've never actually worked directly for Microsoft. But you'll see my name show up a lot of time in the Microsoft space because I was for 13 years. I was Microsoft MVP. I go up to Seattle usually when there's not a pandemic, but go up to Seattle on a regular basis and do these presentations. So the past couple of years, I've also been doing some serious work in the IT information security space. So I've been working a lot with a lot of our customers in trying to keep them secure from a lot of the evolving threats. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is because these threats are not just the types of threats that are being faced by Google or Pfizer or large companies. They're really being faced by everyone that's out there today. So if you are, as an entrepreneur, starting a company and you have a great idea, I guarantee you that there's somebody somewhere else that wants to steal that idea. And they have a lot of tools and a lot of ways in which they're going to be able to do that. And that's really what the focus of this presentation is that to kind of open your eyes into the way that people get hacked nowadays, how many of those approaches are being used, and then how to, the tools and techniques you can use to avoid yourself being hacked using those various approaches that we'll be talking about. So again, this is the main focus of this conversation. I'm happy to, when I'm taking questions, of course, take questions about other things as well that may be tangentially associated with this, or if you're even just interested in some of the travel aspects of what I do as well. I'm always fascinated and happy to talk about that. But let's dive right into this, because I'm hoping by the end of the first half of this that you're actually pretty scared about the types of things I'm about to say, because the hackers have gotten a lot more sophisticated. If you ever, I don't know if you've ever watched there was a movie back from the 80s called War Games, and it was Matthew Broderick, and he was a young teenage punk who kind of hacked his way into essentially the Department of Defense. And started playing a game with a computer and ended up making the computer think that it was launching an attack against the Soviet Union. Long story short is that's kind of what we used to think of as a hacker, is a teenage kid sitting in his bedroom trying to get into things. And those people still exist. I'm not saying they don't, but the professional hacker, the one that's getting paid to do this, those are generally the ones you need to be worried about, much more so than Matthew Broderick. So let's dive into some of the techniques that we see these hackers are using against organizations today. I'm going to start with one that's really, really common today. You may have heard of something called phishing, and that's phishing with a P. Phishing is, in a broader sense, it's where you try to see if you can get someone to give up some kind of information. That could be through some forms of social engineering, where you call up a number and you say, "Hey, I'm this person. Can you reset my passwords?" And that type of thing happens a lot. In fact, one of the famous hackers, Kevin Mitnick, that's how he got access to data. Is he just called people and gave them to divulge their information. Said, "Hey, I'm human resources. Can you give me this information?" But spear phishing is a technique in which you target individuals within the organization. And the reason why that they do that is that it used to be very successful for hackers to just go en masse and try to send phishing attacks to everybody within an organization and just wait for the ones to actually click on it, click on the links or click on the payload that they embedded. But what they found is that the IT security folks got a little bit more aggressive about things and started to realize, hey, let's block these email domains that are just spamming us. Let's block these IP addresses that are hitting us. And so they got a little bit smarter and they said, well, you know what? The ones that we really care about are the executives and the people that are control of the finances. So let's go up to LinkedIn. Let's find out who is the CFO within this organization, who controls, the financial paychecks, who works within finance, who's an executive that might have access to things, and then they specifically target those people. In fact, a lot of times they'll target them with emails that look very, very legitimate. And a lot of these emails that we see in spear phishing attacks will come from a trusted partner. So immediately that person's guard is down. They say, "Oh, I know this person. You know, this is someone that I've dealt with in the past, and it looks like they want me to open a spreadsheet that's related to the latest quarterly numbers or something." What ends up happening is that they let their guard down. They open up that spreadsheet. There's a macro within it that installs malware, and now that hacker is in their machine. Now that hacker has entire control over their machine. They can monitor keystrokes. They can turn on the webcam to see what that person's doing. There's a lot of other things you can do once someone gets into their system. And so it's either, again, by attachments, but a lot of times today it's actually just done by links. So you've probably seen this before, and some of you may have even been victim to it in some cases. Unfortunately, it is very prevalent, in which people will just send links. They say, okay, your account has been, we need you to re-authenticate and say that you really are. Please click here. Or there's been a charge on your account. That's they get the panic part of your brain going by saying things like, you've been charged $250 from Costco. Please click here to verify your information, and immediately start thinking, oh no, this wasn't me. And you click on it. They take you to a page that looks like the Costco page or that looks like the Bank of America page. And the moment you enter in your username and password, they do what's called credential harvesting. And that's basically just taking your credentials. Within seconds of you entering it in that site, they're now attempting it on the real Bank of America site or on the real Costco site and attempting to get in. So for your organization, the reason why, of course, this is a big risk is everybody's connected to the cloud nowadays, which has some great benefits to it, but it also means that I can log into my Google account, or I can log into Office 365, or I can log into any number of these cloud services with just username and password in most cases. And we'll talk about ways in which you can improve this. But you can see how this becomes an issue, because as much as you train people, one of the things that I found is that there's always going to be a certain number of individuals who will click on that link. They'll click on it, they'll download that attachment. They just can't help themselves. They're what we call repeat offenders. And surprisingly, it happens a lot. within organizations that were trying to maintain this. So you need more tools at your disposal than just telling people, hey, don't click on links anymore, because we see these spear phishing attacks be brutally effective. When they attack the IT personnel, and you'd think IT personnel would know better, but when they attack them, it's particularly problematic because the IT personnel oftentimes have elevated privileges that allow them to do things that the standard user would not be able to do. So those IT admins will, when they've been compromised, at that point, the attackers can get out and do a bunch of stuff. And incidentally, when someone gets inside these organizations, you usually don't know about it for days, if not weeks. A lot of these organizations don't realize that while this is, weeks later, they've been siphoning out information, they've been planting little time bombs all over the place, and when they're ready to, they'll essentially just level your IT to the ground. That's exactly what happened, by the way, to Sony Pictures, which kind of brings us to our next topic, which is, hey, we talked about the professional hackers. These are not just professional hackers. They're essentially state workers that are working for different well-funded and well-organized states that are out there that have it in their best interest to, let's say, steal as much information as they can, or to, in some cases, just steal financial information, steal money, really. I mean, there's a financial benefit to doing that. So it's either the host country that they're in overlooks that, or in some cases actively sponsors it, where they are, they're the ones essentially behind the scenes, making those hacking attacks, trying to, organizing and picking organizations that they want to hit in advance. And by the way, these are not just, of course, you can think of the standard targets like Department of Defense type targets, or NGO, non-governmental organization targets. But we're actually seeing these state actors just hit pretty much anybody who they can. Because a lot of times, they may want to, they may not get enough state funding anyway, so they use the financial part of things to fund that. And there's various financial approaches, ways that they can bypass even some of the financial restrictions that we, as a country here in the United States, we may have certain sanctions in place, but those can be bypassed by various approaches as well too. So state-sponsored attacks really ups the ante. Like I said, this isn't Matthew Broderick anymore. We're dealing with server farms of people that are clocking in and clocking out while they go in and try to hack your password day in and day out. Ransomware is out there, and it is a really, really massive problem. Not to single out organizations, but this was a public thing that happened, and it's kind of close to probably a lot of us. You guys, of course, may have ridden Muni if you live in San Francisco. Even if you don't, it's here. I recall a day when Muni just kind of opened up the turnstiles in the Muni Metro, and everybody rode Muni for free. And why did they ride Muni for free? Because the entire SFMTA network had been hit by ransomware, and every single workstation was encrypted and was compromised by ransomware. So it took them a while to clean up on that. And, again, to the benefit, I actually know some of the people that work in IT. There was a brand new IT manager who had just come in, wasn't really that person's fault. Again, I'm not trying to single out some organization. This happens all over the place. But ransomware is a massive problem because it really doesn't take too much to put it into place. I mentioned the IT admin before, and that IT admin with the elevated rights, that's oftentimes the only person you need to attack. If you can properly phish that person, you get that person's credentials, and if that person is what's called an active directory domain admin, they have the rights to do whatever they want to do to everything within that entire domain. And so that's oftentimes how they get in there and then go out and install this ransomware. And from a technical perspective, ransomware, what it does is it encrypts the hard drive. And the key to decrypt that is only accessible once you pay up the ransom. And of course, they use a method like cryptocurrency, which can't be controlled by a government, so that they can, bypass sanctions, things like that I mentioned. So these are a lot of the reasons. There's financial reasons for this. Most organizations don't end up paying the ransom, but there's a surprising number that do. So this is really lucrative for the organizations that launch these ransomware attacks. And again, really, it's making anybody that has the rights to do something. It could just be the person that you've compromised only has rights to a single file server. But if you're not doing backups on the file server, you better have a contingency plan in place for all of a sudden everybody's locked out of the files that are on that file server because the person that was hacked had read-write access to particular shares on that machine. So it doesn't have to be, as big as the whole organization. It can be small areas of the organization. And the other thing to note is once hackers get inside an organization, they usually don't just do one thing. What they do is they drop in all of these little back doors all over the place. It takes a long time to effectively get out a lot of the back doors that are there. If you recall, if you've been watching the news recently, the Solar Winds hack left back doors that are still being cleaned up in a lot of organizations. So that was a massive hack. And we just had another hack today, another major one from a group called Hafnium, which is a state-sponsored group. Which was affecting Microsoft Exchange servers. So, again, not to pick on anybody, I do a lot of stuff with Microsoft. It's not just Microsoft. There's zero-day Google attacks and all these other companies, but these types of things are prevalent. You'll see them if you follow the IT security news. This stuff happens a lot, and it even leaks its way into the regular news broadcasts. Things like Solar Winds was a massive controversy once they found out that was indeed a hack. Okay, so device theft. Of course, this has been something that's ongoing for a long time. It's not something new where someone will break into a place and steal a computer. But one of the things that's interesting is that the techniques that they're using are getting a lot more sophisticated. I love living in San Francisco. It's a great place, but we do have kind of a petty theft problem, especially in the smash and grab, what they call smash and grab area. That's where, most people that live in the city will know you never leave anything visible in your car, because if you do, you come in the morning, the window's broken and that stuff is gone. It could be a pile of garbage in the back seat, but that may be enough reason for someone to break the window and go in and take it. So, of course, most people here know not to leave a laptop, but we hear the story of, a tourist who comes in and leaves a laptop in the back seat of the car, and then we chuckle as of course, what were you thinking? Why would you leave a laptop there? So smart as we are, what we do instead is we, of course, lock that laptop in the trunk. Well, the attackers are getting electronically sophisticated as well, too. One of the things that they've started to do is they've started to walk up and down where there's parked cars with a Bluetooth detector that'll detect when there's a Bluetooth signal coming out of the trunk of a car. And if there is, if you have a device that has, for example, a Bluetooth signal built into it, that actually doesn't completely go to sleep, it stays, for example, in a suspended mode, but keeps Bluetooth on, they'll be able to determine that. And then they'll break the front window of that car, pop the trunk, and then get the laptop out of the back. So they've gotten more sophisticated in the way that they handle that. They've gotten more sophisticated in the way that they fence the stolen goods. They found ways around. I saw one of the things that they do, and this is a scary thing if you think about it. One is just walk up to someone who's on their phone usually, and say, "Hey, I have a gun in my pocket. Give me your phone, but before you give me your phone, go in and turn off the Apple protection or the Google protection in it." And so they actually walk you through the process of doing that, and then you pass the device over. At that point, they have an unlocked device with all your personal data on it, no less, which is no fun. But they can then sell that on the market, as opposed to where normally if they steal a phone just off a table, it's a lot harder to sell it because it has the encryption protection built into it, and it's not something that you can easily pass from one person to the next. As a organization, as a startup, you're going to need electronic devices, but you're going to need to find ways to secure those. You're going to need to have protections in place. And again, the second half of this presentation will go into what it is that you can do to protect yourself from this type of activity. Okay, so we talked about the bad guys, right? Well, one of the things a lot of people don't realize is that the majority of intellectual property loss is not actually due to a bad guy doing some form of hacking. It's actually due to somebody within your organization, usually a well-meaning individual, doing something called oversharing of content. And this is unfortunately a little bit too easy to do nowadays. So what ends up happening a lot of times is they will, share something in the cloud with somebody, and a lot of a lot of times you'll create a link, you send that email off to that person. Well, maybe there's someone on the CC line that it wasn't supposed to be there. Maybe it got forwarded off because they needed to do support on it to somebody else, and it goes outside of the organization. If that link gets out there and there's not some additional security around that link, someone can go in and access that data that wasn't supposed to access that data. At the same time, if you're sending email itself is generally unencrypted. A lot of people don't realize that. So you have to trust the path at which it takes between your email servers. If there's someone in between that intercepts the emails, they can get those links. If there's sometimes people that are looking for those particular types of links, if you're in an unsecured location, they may see that link like a coffee Wi-Fi shop or something like that. So the point is that there are many ways of oversharing information, and it's not just that. I've seen organizations where they lock down their sharing mechanisms to not be able to share with the outside. So of course, the first things the users do and say, "Oh, I can't share this with my buddy on the outside. I'm going to use something like Dropbox, or I'm going to use some unsanctioned service to share this." Again, at that point, it's going beyond your organizational controls. You don't have controls what is happening to that data. Another thing, a lot of times this is what makes the news. Another form of oversharing that we see is when people will set up these databases in the clouds, in different cloud providers like Azure or Amazon Web Services, and they don't set the proper security on it. What ends up happening is that all of a sudden, there's a public repository of some information that wasn't supposed to be public, and this happens all the time. I saw it recently. It was one of the California DMV had given their data to some leased company that was doing something with it, but they put it on a cloud website that was completely unprotected with no password. Someone figured that out, downloaded a bunch of information. All of a sudden, you have a massive data leak, and everybody's scrambling to try to protect themselves. So oversharing of information, a lot of times it's accidental. This doesn't mean that you can say, "Hey, I trust everybody within my organization," but in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily about trust. It's about the techniques and the tools that you have to prevent accidental oversharing of information. While all this is happening, we think we're really, really, really super great about creating passwords. Most people think, "Hey, you know what? I stopped making my password the name of my dog 5 years ago. I'm good at this." Or you know what? I took the A in my password and I replaced it with an ampersand, and my S's are dollar signs. So I'm good at password maintenance. We talk about I talked about the war games. If you recall, the way that Matthew Broderick hacked in is he actually guessed a password, and the password was Steven, which it's funny. Is the guy that created the computers, it was son, and the guy did some research, which is how a lot of hackers actually get in, and that's how he was able to hack it. Um, Seems silly right now. We think to ourselves, why would you create a password as simple as Steven? But I can tell you, one of the things people don't realize is you can have a 20 character long password, but if that character was involved in any hack anywhere around the world, it is sitting in what we would call a dark web database, ready for people to use for dictionary attacks. So there are these dark web databases that today, the most common one that I've seen used has 766 million unique passwords in it. So if you think about every possible password that was part of any service that was hacked gets dumped up into these dark web databases. Anytime there's a new one, they all get pushed up into there. And the first thing that the hackers do is they try to log in as those users with those dark web databases. So this is a significant problem because I'll kind of walk you through a common scenario for organizations. Let's say I've started work at organization X, and organization X has an email address, a policy, and a corporate password that I create. Now I'm smart enough not to use my Facebook password like Bob did, because Bob used his Facebook password. We know that because he told me, because Bob's not that smart. But hey, let's not pick on Bob as much. um, I'm using a different password than that. But after a couple of weeks, they asked me to create an account with a different service. And that account is some cloud provider. And I enter in my username as my email address. And my password, well, I'm using it for the organizational work that I'm doing. So I'm going to just use the same password because I don't want to have to remember all my passwords. So I use that same password. And don't worry, I have the ampersand in my password, so I'm protected. Well, that cloud provider gets hacked. Those usernames and passwords go up into the dark web database, and immediately the hackers start to try to log into my accounts. And guess what? I created it with the same password. They're going to now get into my organizational account with that password. So the way that we're doing passwords is unfortunately flawed, and it has been flawed for quite some time. What I usually recommend to people is that you use what are called passphrases. And there's multiple reasons for this. But one of the main reasons is that humans are actually very bad at remembering long sequences of random characters, which is unfortunately the way that we do passwords today. If you use even, like a password generator, it creates these long generated, it's got a bunch of characters and what have you. There's no way you're ever going to remember that. It's supposed to, by design with the password manager, do that because you're pushing it in directly from the password manager. But for passwords that you're supposed to remember, those are actually really bad passwords. And they also lead to really bad behaviors. One of the bad behaviors, what we call the sticky note problem. And that's walk into any office and lift up someone's keyboard, and there's invariably a sticky note on the bottom of it that has that person's password. Okay. Every one of us probably knows somebody that does that, if it's not someone like you that does that. But that's actually one of the first things that people do when they're doing, there's these companies that do what are called penetration tests. And that's one of the first things they do, is they look for that kind of thing, because when you create these long passwords, and especially if you're changing them all the time, nobody remembers them. So they write them down. And it ends up, being that they get compromised because of that. So what I recommend is something called a passphrase. I'm giving an example here: yellow birdseed hat pumpkin. It takes longer to type out, but humans are very good at mnemonics. We can remember something like, there's some yellow birdseed sitting on a hat, sitting on a pumpkin. That's my password. And that's actually, well, up until I created this slide, I think for the sake of argument, I actually threw that into a dark web database. But it's actually, up until a certain point, was a good password. Maybe add a number onto it, because a lot of times they do force you to do numbers. But computers, when they're trying to do what's called a brute force attack, they're trying all these different combinations, and they're not necessarily trying a bunch of different, what we call seed words. Sometimes they are, but even so, you'd be surprised at how even just 4 seed words would take a computer an incredible amount of time to try to brute force attack your password. And like I said, if you throw in an additional number or just a symbol, put an exclamation point at the end, it makes it even that much harder for it to be cracked. There are, incidentally, what we call white hat websites where you can test your password. I've included a link to one. The reason I say white hat is you want to be very careful about any site that you go to where you throw your password in. But if you want to find out, even if you're not comfortable in throwing your password up there, if you want to find out if your user account has ever been involved in any type of compromise and whether or not they took the passwords or not, go to that website. It's haveibeenpwned.com. You can put in your email account into there, or you could put in, a lot of times you could say, put in an old password of yours, one that you might have been using 5 to 10 years ago, and you may be surprised at what comes back. And by the way, this is how those hackers send those emails that freak out your in-laws, or maybe they freaked out you, where they say in the subject line, your password is blah, right? And guess what? Sometimes it's your old password. And you go, how did they even get that? Well, it's pretty simple. They got it off a dark web database, which some guy, either professional or a script kiddie or whatever, had stolen it. So again, we don't do our passwords as well as we should. And I've got some more techniques later on when we get into the what do we do section that we will talk about here. So um, I don't want to necessarily get too far down an IT rat hole, what we call a rat hole here. So I don't want to get too much into this, but if you understand the way that computers handle passwords, one of the scariest things about the way that they're handling it is something called cached credentials. So what a cache credential is it's basically a copy of your password that is stored locally on that machine that is used to allow you to get into that machine if you don't have network connectivity back to the servers that actually store your password. And there's multiple reasons for doing that. If you didn't have cache credentials in place, when you're sitting on an airplane and you weren't connected to any network, you wouldn't be able to unlock your laptop. Or if you get disconnected, your internet gets disconnected from home, you wouldn't be able to unlock your machine. So cache credentials are useful, but they also are the number one attack vector for getting in and getting a hold of other credentials. And the really scary part is a lot of times this is how even some of the best IT run organizations get hacked, because the IT administrator, maybe they never click on links. They're really good about this. They don't fall for the problems that we talked about earlier in the spear phishing attacks. Instead, what happens is that someone brings them their computer and says, hey, fix my printer, IT boy, and then, okay, fine, I'll fix your printer. They log in with their credentials, they fix the printer, they give them back the computer. Well, in a lot of cases, unless you've taken precautions, that password of that IT admin is cached locally on that machine. And now all it takes is Bob, whose laptop we just fixed the printer for, getting compromised, and the hacker now has access to try to attempt to brute force or dictionary attack that IT admin's password. And if that password, by the way, is in one of those 799 million entries, it will be cracked within 5 seconds. And if it's a small password that's, let's say, lower than 8 characters, it will be cracked within maybe a few hours at most. So this is where cache credentials presents a huge problem for organizations today, is that it allows a backdoor in, because I don't care about Bob's password, but I sure care about Jane, who is the IT admin, because she's got the keys to the kingdom, as we say, and she can get in and do ransomware on every machine and make a lot of headaches for someone in IT. So I talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to delve into a little bit more about the concept of what's called a lateral attack. A lateral attack is essentially a concept I've been referring to, where I gain access to Bob's machine, and now I use Bob's machine to attempt to gain access to other things. Lateral attacks may take place under multiple scenarios. So I may go from Bob to Jane, and then I may decide that Jane doesn't have enough rights. So now I go from Jane to Jill, who's an executive, so lateral attacks are going from one machine to the next. And like I said, a lot of times these things, they take place over weeks. The Sony picture hack, which was that state-sponsored attack, they created a movie which was considered unflattering by a particular regime, and that regime spent months hacking them. And once they were in, they spent weeks planting little time bombs all over the place. And and again, they just leveled their organization. They essentially had to build everything from scratch because they did such an effective job of stealing all the IP that they had, and also essentially just wiping everything out before they left there. So, and they did that via lateral attacks. If you look at the attack vectors they got in through one resource and they used that to gain access to another one. So we see these types of things. They include, again, not to get too technical, there's attacks called like a golden ticket attack, where if you have an admin account, you can create this ticket. It's just like it sounds, a golden ticket. It allows you to get in. It's like a fast pass that will get you into anything, but you never have to pay for it, right? And it never expires. So those are the kind of attacks that they will initiate after they gain access to these organizations. So now that I've sufficiently scared you, hopefully, some of the next tips and tricks that we'll talk about will help you to understand that most of this is within your control, and there are tools that you can utilize as an entrepreneur, either yourself or when you start to work within your IT organization to set up your information policies. There are different things that you can do to improve your security posture, including some that by themselves will solve maybe 90% of the problems that we talked about. So we'll go through a couple of these things. First, I wanted to start with this concept of what we call defense in depth. And not to focus too much on with this diagram on the exact on the physical network host application. Those are useful when you're designing an application itself. But if you think of it as more of the number of things that a hacker would have to get through to actually gain access to the data that they're looking for. So if you make it so that they have to bypass not only complex password policies, but also multi-factor authentication and data loss prevention policies, all of those things together are going to make it just that much more difficult for them to get in. When you see these situations where organizations have been hacked, a lot of times there was only one door that that person needed to get into. There weren't multiple doors that were there. Having those multiple layers really helps to better secure your resources. So think about when you're developing these strategies, think about defense in depth, creating those multiple layers that the hackers would have to get to. We talked a lot about passwords. Passphrases, definitely a good idea. You may not have control over this. This may be your IT organization that has control over this, but it's still shocking to me today. One of the things that we do in IT, which I will come out and say is really it's more security theater than anything else. This is the removing your shoes in the security line at the airport that we've been doing for years. I mean, there may have been a good reason in the beginning, but there's probably better ways of doing it now. There's a lot of things that we do like that we've just taken for granted over the years. And one of those things is we take it for granted that every 3 months or 6 months, or if you're lucky, every year or something, you get forced to change your passwords. The reasons why this is actually a bad thing is that if you have a globally unique password that is long enough and is ideally, again, a passphrase, it is going to be extremely unlikely that that password will get compromised over the period of time in which most organizations require you to force you to reset your password. And resetting your password simply forces the users to go the sticky note approach because they get tired of getting chided by IT every time they forget their password. So I highly recommend, if you are in charge of IT, consider not being as aggressive in your password policies. Bring those password policies down and instead implement password best practices. Talk to users about passphrases. Have your users use password management tools. That actually makes it much easier to manage the plethora of passwords that organizations have out there. I've been using LastPass for quite some time personally. I've used OnePass professionally. I've used some other password management tools professionally. They're really sophisticated tools that sometimes allow you to share password without even sharing the password itself. There's some tools that allow you to do that. Really cool techniques and capabilities they have for doing that type of thing. But use a password management tool. And when you're using a password management tool, that means every time you create up a new account somewhere, just use an auto-generated password that you then log into. Don't even try to remember it because you're not going to. We talked about that. But just have the tool be able to do that. And then, of course, create a long and complex passphrase to get into the tool, because, of course, you don't want to lock yourself out of the tool that gets you into things. So, so password management tools, those are a good idea. And never, ever, ever reuse a password. Just it's a really, really bad idea. Even if, it's much better to have a password that's only one character different than it is to have a password that's exactly the same. And I don't want to necessarily bore you in the details, but it has to do with the fact that most password tools today work actually not by sending the password over the network after you enter it. They work by doing something called a hash. And a hash is different. If one character changes, the hash is completely different. It's a 128 character string that gets created when you enter your password. So even if it's just a little bit different, it's enough to where you see the hacker that's trying to look at your hash will see that it's not a reused hash. Ideally, again, use password management so that the passwords are completely different, but at a minimum, make sure you're not reusing any password across any service. And I know that's really bad. I know you want your passwords to be, the name of your dog plus a 1 at the end, but it's the problem is that that just doesn't work anymore. And again, check your passwords. They've probably already been compromised somewhere. Hyperlink safety is a big issue because we talked about people getting spear phished or even just regular phished via hyperlinks. And so the way that these hackers work is they will set up a website. It's very easy to do this nowadays. You can quickly set up a website on GoDaddy or what have you within a couple hours at most. And they use that. They rent some space within a web service provider. They use that to install some hacking tools. They then make a link that goes to that, and they send an email out to someone they want to spear phish. It's a brand new website. Nobody's ever seen it, so it's not part of any dark databases where things get blocked. And a lot of time what ends up happening is that the person clicks on the link and they get this professionally looked set of tools that looks like their Bank of America login or looks like their JP Morgan Chase login. I actually did a screenshot that what you're looking at is a screenshot out of one of the ones that I get. I get these all the time. You can usually pick out the ones that are bad, but because they'll have spelling mistakes or they'll have other problems in it. But one thing to note is you can always hover over or right click, depending on your operating system, the link itself and take a look at it. If it doesn't say Bank of America, if it doesn't say Chase or what have you, if it says something like what you're seeing here, that's the bad guy trying to get access to your credentials. In fact, honestly, I've gotten to the point where I never click on links in email. I will, if I think that that this is a real email from my bank, I will instead just open up a browser, go to bankofamerica.com, and enter my credentials there. If it's really important, they're going to notify me on that site. You don't need to click on the links in the email. So, again, it's gotten to the point where they're getting sophisticated enough. I don't want to take any chances. I used to just check the links, but now I go through an additional step, a step of just not even clicking on links nowadays. Physical security, when you're, for your organization that you have, this may be tough to do. A lot of times people do tailgate. That's where you're following someone else in who has a key card that allows you into the organization. So you may have seen in some of the more modern buildings, they have these, they're almost like subway style turnstiles where, the person that walks in has to beep their badge, and then there's a series of sensors that sees as they go through. If more than one person goes through, it sets off an alarm, or it blocks them, it physically blocks them. Those types of things are useful. It's hard to do for a lot of organizations. It's surprising how easy the penetration test people can get into, back doors or find ways around, which is another reason why, incidentally, one of the things that's always shocking to me how quickly this works is hackers. The way that they will install viruses within organizations is they just drop thumb drives. They walk through a building after they tailgate. They drop thumb drives around the building, and inevitably someone goes, "Oh, look, free thumb drive," or "What's this about?" and plugs it into their computer, and then runs whatever it is that's on that machine, and now compromises that particular machine. So, from a physical security perspective, make sure you have policies in place around that. And then if you are using if you have a guest wireless network or those types of things, make sure it's physically separate and isolated. I can take highly technical questions if you have them. I'm not sure how technical the audience is, but I can go into a little bit more detail when we get to the question segment of this. Other things, highly recommended to do, always use full disk encryption on any device that has any of your intellectual property in it. So most modern mobile operating systems today allow you to do full disk encryption of their devices. So this includes all iPhones, as well as most of the Android operating systems that are out there. You need to, of course, then as well, force these devices to use some kind of PIN or biometrics so that they, when they're logging in and really decrypting the data, that is enforced. You're not, if someone does steal the device, they're not able to gain access to the data itself that's on that encrypted drive. And that goes as well for laptops as well. So when the laptop is stolen out of the trunk of the car, you don't have to worry about it because it's been full disk encrypted. They're not going to be able to get in. There's tools like BitLocker that are very good at doing that type of full disk encryption. And there's other tools that IT has in place to be able to then just remotely wipe systems. If they're still on the network, like if the phone is out there, you can very quickly go through and wipe it. You can do those. There's personal tools as well too. Like you have an iPhone, to find the iPhone, you can, if someone has stolen your phone, you can remotely wipe it as long as it's still connected to the internet. Some of the thieves are pretty good about, they'll quickly go into airplane mode, but it also depends on if, or they'll force it to shut down. But if they can't lock it, or if they haven't gotten to that point, you can go in and remotely wipe your device. Data loss prevention. This is a little bit more technical, but it's really important. So I wanted to cover this because we talked about your important data. You've got a startup, you've got your idea, all your data is out there. Most of the time, your data is the form of Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, or other types of open Office documents. Whatever it is, you've got documents, spreadsheets that are out there. And what you want to avoid is, you want to avoid the situation where someone just walks up to a computer, sticks in a thumb drive, copies off all those documents, walks out, and now they have all of they've got all the data that they need to recreate your product. And the tools to help you with that are what are called DLP, or data loss prevention tools. And those are tools that restrict what happens to the data after it's been opened. So there's tools that work directly with Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, et cetera, as well as other suites like Google Suites. And what they do is, after you open up a document, they restrict the ability to print that document. They restrict the ability to copy and paste content out of it, to save as a new version of that document. And so what generally happens is that you divide your users up into two categories. One is the people that need to make changes. That's a very small group of people, the authors. And then there's other people that just need to read the content. The readers get the policies restricted to them. That way you slow down the ability for someone to do a full-scale data loss. And even in the case of the people that have the ability to make changes, those people still have certain restrictions in place, like they have to remain within the boundaries of the document. It doesn't allow them to save it as or take it outside of the repository. So there's various tools and techniques that allow you to avoid that, and check again with whatever vendor you go with. If it's the Microsoft space, I'm intimately familiar with a lot of the DLP tools in Microsoft, but again, some of the other big providers like Google also have DLP tools embedded in. Okay, and now which really takes me to, if there's one thing that you get out of this presentation, hopefully it's enable multi-factor authentication wherever you possibly can, on your personal accounts and on your corporate accounts, if you have the ability to do that. Again, if of course it's your startup, you want to dictate this from the beginning. Multi-factor is adding an additional factor in addition to your username and password that the user has to enter in. So you may be familiar with it. A lot of times it takes the place of, your banks put it and have put it into place for most of the banks today. So you enter in your username, you enter the password, and they say, you're coming in from a new computer that we're not familiar with. We're going to text you a code, send that code. That's an example of multi-factor authentication. Now that's a lot better than just username and password, because of course username and password can fall afoul of all of the things that we talked about, the credential harvesting, the dark web databases. They can get in with just username and password. But if they're prompted for that additional factor, they're extremely unlikely to be able to get your SMS messages. By the way, I've included in order of effectiveness the different factors that you would include, because SMS is actually a little bit less secure than you really want to have, because there's something called SIM swapping, which is actually remarkably easy to do because the phone companies really don't care too much about this. And what SIM swapping is that it's someone calling up AT&T or T-Mobile or whoever and saying, I am Bob, even though they're not Bob, they're Hacker Joe. And I've got a new SIM for my phone. Here's my new SIM. And they ask them some security question like, okay, what's your mother's maiden name? This is stuff you can easily find out about a person. And then they they turn that SIM over to them. They get the multi-factor because they were prepared. They have the username and password and the multi-factor SIM or SMS message on that SIM, and they're now in with doing that SIM swapping attack. So it's better than nothing. Don't get me wrong. Don't put it into, don't let perfect be enemy of the good, as they say. But if you have access to things like Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator apps, those are much better. And then, of course, the best security is these things called hardware keys. So you may see some organizations use these keys that have encryption certificates on them. They need the hardware key in addition to the username and password to be able to even get to be able to log into their systems. So use multi-factor, turn it on. It's available all over the place. Facebook has it, Twitter has it. So any of the personal accounts that you're using, you really want to be, you don't want someone to compromise you. I'm talking about this a lot of times from an organizational or corporate perspective, but from a personal perspective, you're just as much of a risk of somebody saying that, for example, taking over your Facebook account and then using that to send a Facebook message to your grandmother saying, "Hey, I've got a financial problem. Send me, these Amazon gift cards or something." Or I'm being held hostage, or there's a whole list of things that they do to try to get people to send money via these personal accounts. And by enabling multi-factor, that's really how you can solve 99.9% of those types of attacks, is turning it on. If you have everything, one of the things I do, I have everything within my Authenticator app. So it's very easy. It's gotten so much better nowadays because a lot of times it'll push it through. I can even do it off of the watch. It'll say, I'm allowing this. That's my additional factor. I then get in. And a lot of times you won't get reprompted that often as well, too, because they save what's called a token that keeps you into that. But again, by all means, turn on multi-factor authentication. Okay, one of the things I wanted to demonstrate here, this is just a quick demonstration because I want to leave some time for questions here, but this is a tool that is provided when you have access to certain Microsoft subscriptions. And again, I apologize about this being a little bit Microsoft focused. Like I said, I've worked heavily with Microsoft over the years, so those are the tools that I'm used to. There's a lot of different security tools that are out there as well, too. But this is a really interesting one provided by Microsoft called Cloud App Security. And the reason why it's interesting is that it allows a organization to have a better control over the applications that their end users are using, and to be able to see risk, such as a user logging in from a country that that maybe is not normal for your organization for them to be logging into, or I see some risky applications. I see a login from a risky IP address. Like for example, there's IP addresses that are known to be these VPN access points where hackers will use. So this may be a hacker that's coming in from China or Nigeria or something, but it looks like they're coming in from Switzerland. They're using a VPN to access that. And most of these organizations are aware of those types of things. But then you can also see, things like I've noticed one of my users doing and by the way, this is all fake data in case you're wondering if Joanna is upset at me. This is a Microsoft demo site that I have access to. But you can see this is with it's being triggered by a mass download of information. So if you're trying to avoid circumstances where someone is, your DLP policies, they're trying to bypass those, or they're trying to gain access to your intellectual property, these kind of tools, something like Cloud App Security, allows us to create these policies and to be able to enforce those policies. And it allows you to, for example, we talked about Dropbox. I can take a look at the use of Dropbox within the organization, how many of my users are using it, what IP addresses are coming from, what Microsoft considers to be in terms of how good of an organization is this. So you can see again, this is a fair amount of data that's being uploaded. I can see which users are using this. This is highly useful, by the way, if there's a compromise, because this also alerts you. It says, hey, company X was compromised. I've noticed that you have these 12 users that have used company X. reach out to these users and ensure that their password has been reset or that they're not reusing those passwords. So,
Michael, I'm sorry, we can't see your screen. We
oh,
just see the demo.
okay, I'm sorry. I've been sharing for a while. Let me, let's see. I guess I'm sharing just the,
You're just the PowerPoint, yes.
thank you for chiming in. Okay, well, let me start sharing again. I think, let me see. Here we go. I figured it out. Okay, let me know if you see that. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I'm used to Microsoft Teams where it shares everything that's on that one side. Anyway, no excuse. I should have remembered that Zoom does it by application. So what I've been talking about is this. um, this is a I'm looking at Dropbox. I'm looking at the users that are using it. I'm using I can see the usage of those users over time, the IP addresses that they're coming from. This is, by the way, it's this may be eye opening for you guys to note, but if you're working within organizations today, the IT people, be nice to them because they can see everything that you're doing, absolutely everything. Okay, so when you're using your corporate laptop, let's just say the privacy policies in the States are different. There's actually different policies in Europe. When you use this Microsoft tool in Europe, you have to actually what's called obfuscate the users so you don't see their name. But in the States, there's policies that states that what you do within the organization is viewable by the organization. So just a word to the wise is most organizations have access to tools like this, and it's for security reasons that they're doing it because they want to again do things like avoid situations where they have data compromise or notify users that are using specific applications in terms of which applications have been compromised and whether to their reset their passwords. So again, this is I'm looking at the discovered applications that exist within my organization. I've got a dashboard of all the different traffic that's out here. This is one type of tool that helps me to understand, what's going on, where are my activities, where are they coming from, should I have activities coming in from these particular countries. uh, when you have a real organization using this is much richer. You have a lot more rich metrics. I can see the applications that people are using. I can determine whether or not some of those applications are applications I want them to use or not. Again, this is just one example of a cloud-based tool that allows us to get better visibility and to control better what's happening. And really, ultimately, it's about avoiding your intellectual property being lost from within the cloud. So let me go back to the presentation real quickly, and I'm going to share again the screen. Thank you. And that because I want to make sure there's enough time for questions here and also give you the slide that has my contact information. I encourage you to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to us as a company on CCO. So my email address, if you want to email me, is I don't put it here for the bots, but it's michael@cco.com. So it's pretty straightforward. So if you have any questions if you want to engage with us or what have you, send that to CCO. But you can also, probably the best way to contact me in terms of my public speaking and those types of things is actually to connect to me on LinkedIn and then to ask any questions you have on LinkedIn. But I also want to put it, I've got a link into I've got a travel blog that I maintained for a couple of years. You will note that I haven't done anything on it in a few years. I've been a little busy and it's been hard to maintain those, but I've got some really good travel stories in there if you want to take a look at. We'll learn about some places around the world. That's a picture of me sitting at the Takshang Monastery, which is in Bhutan, up in the Himalayas. So it's also known as the Tiger's Nest Monastery. That's kind of the nickname that it has. It really interesting place. I got some fascinating travel stories to tell if you're interested in that. But connect to me there. I also will be uploading this slide deck to SlideShare. This is where I upload it. I'll provide it to Vivian as well. But if you go to slideshare.net/Michael T. Noel, you will find this SlideShare up there as well. I'm on Twitter as well. You see my Twitter handle there. So that said, I'm going to open it up for questions.
Hey,
Hi,
well,
Michael. Can I
share
ask a question?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, Michael. This is Ian.
I just have a quick question. Usually, if we had a website, does the HTTPS the log is it secure, or should we do anything further than that?
Yeah, so websites that start with HTTPS are using it's what's called TLS. You may have heard it called SSL. That's actually the old name for it. It's basically an encrypted channel that's using a certificate. Okay, and that certificate is trusted by both parties. And I don't want to necessarily get into too much detail and go down another rat hole here, but basically, it creates an encryption between you and the person that runs that website, so that if somebody intercepts your traffic, they can't decrypt that traffic. So from that perspective, yes, you're much more secure with HTTPS site than you are with an HTTP site, which is just that can be intercepted by someone. They can read everything that's going. I would never enter a password into a site that is just an HTTP site. You always want to make sure if you're entering in some passwords that it is an HTTPS site. And modern browsers do a good, they usually have a little, it looks like a little padlock up there when you're hitting an HTTPS site. So if you see that padlock, that means that you're on a site that's been encrypted.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Philip, go ahead, please.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for sharing your expertise and joining us today. My question is for entrepreneurs who have e-commerce websites. Do you suggest that they take payments on their own website? And most of these e-commerce websites, as you know, are WordPress websites with e-commerce plugins. Would you recommend that they take the credit card information on their website, or would you suggest that they redirect them over to a payment service provider like Stripe or PayPal for security?
A really good question. Today, with the threats that are out there, highly recommend that you send that to another provider, like you said, like Stripe, like PayPal. One of the reasons for that is that there are various rules and regulations that make you responsible if credit card data is compromised. So there's certain notifications that you have to go through. There's a certain amount of things that you have to do to pay for the people that have been compromised to get security monitoring services. And you fundamentally, you don't want that headache of dealing with that. So if you are setting this up, unless you're a really large organization, so for the small, especially entrepreneurial organizations, highly recommend they've made it very easy to do. You just have the plugins to those providers. They're going to take their cut, of course, but that cut pays for all of the security that they have around that. And then there's a lot less headaches that you have to deal with.
It's kind of like, it's almost like you're paying for a little bit of insurance there.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's generally not too high. I mean, of course, you're always, your margins are low, but the amount of work that it would take to go through and create your own platform for properly securing that. You looked at that defense in depth model from earlier, creating all of the different layers to protect the data that's on the inside of that application with the credit card information. And we help companies do this. We've worked with banks and we do things like transparent data encryption and what have you. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of effort. And I guarantee you, unless you're, like I said, unless you're massive, you're going to be spending a lot more money trying to do that than you would be just paying the percentage to that service provider.
So even for WooCommerce, which is an extremely popular plugin on WordPress, even with WooCommerce, you'd say, just send them off, redirect them over to Stripe or PayPal instead?
I'm not as familiar with that plugin. I'm not sure where the data is stored for that. If it's being stored within, that particular, if that's outside of your control, then that could theoretically be okay. I think what I'm saying is you want to avoid your organization physically taking a hold of the credit card numbers, and definitely not of storing them. Most I mean, you will store certain credit cards with certain providers like Amazon and things like that, but a lot of times organizations have gotten away from that because of the liability of holding on to credit card information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan?
Oh, I appreciate the discussion for prevention, but let's say in an instance where your information is compromised, what do you do then? Because I know a friend of a friend who recently, unfortunately, had their social security compromised. Like, how would you go about that?
It's a really good question. this is where we delve into kind of the dirty politics of what I would call the so maybe I'll back up for a second. There's three credit providers that are out there. It's Experian, TransUnion, and X something. I forget the third one, but there's three main ones that are out there. They control access to people getting loans and other financial data and things like this. So what they generally encourage you to do is to sign up for these, what they call credit monitoring services. But in that case, you're still using their services, and a lot of times those are paid services, or you have to have the other service that was responsible for your social security number getting hacked. They might pay for that for a while, but you eventually end up paying for that. One of the things they don't want you to know about is that that you can actually lock completely your credit down so that nobody can access that except for you, because when you lock it down, you put in a secure PIN. And so if you need to, you can unlock it when you need credit. So this depends on your circumstances. If you're in a position where maybe you need to apply for credit often, or, I mean, I understand a startup, you may need to apply for credit quite a bit. You may not want to go through the inconvenience of having to unlock and lock every time you do this. So you may just rely on a credit monitoring service. And those, again, I'm not saying those don't have their place. I'm just saying personally, I found it's much more effective. And I locked Marina and my personal accounts down. Our Social Security has been locked down for probably 5 years. And I tell you, one big side effect of that a lot of people don't talk about, all the junk mail just stops because you're not on the credit radar anymore, and the junk mail is all about trying to get you to sign up for some credit card or something. So it's great for getting rid of junk mail. So, but I don't get paid by these credit monitoring companies, thank goodness, because they would probably stop paying me right now, because they really don't want you to do that. I've noticed that is they try to push you away from locking things down. They used to make it that you had to pay to lock things down, which really feels to me like it's almost like a shakedown from the mob, where it's like you're paying for a non-service. You're paying to not be disturbed, essentially, which I always found humorous. But it's no longer where you have to pay for it. So at least they've come around from that perspective. So you may have noticed you've touched on a touchy point from my perspective. But my recommendation again is to lock down for that user. If your social security number is out there in the wild, it's never going to come out from the wild again. So it's just going to be easier just to lock down that number, and you'll avoid a lot more headaches.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
And Carrillo, I think his hand was raised, and he also posted a question in chat box earlier. CC Carrillo? No? Okay. We'll
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I apologize. Yes, one quick question regarding the hyperlink safety, especially with the ADA, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. How do we address that for individuals that have low vision or use voice recognition technology that is basically a tap, click to get along through a website? How do we do this? How do we address that issue in terms of safety?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't have a good answer for that. I know I worked a little bit with Marina on that, as on where because she works as an associate professor for various colleges in the Bay Area, as well as at City College. And one of the things that she has to do is make things ADA compliant when she creates the courseware.
Yes.
So she had to go through and do that. Now, the link thing, it creates an interesting challenge. Of course, the hackers don't give a damn about making something ADA compliant, right? So they're not going to be doing that, or unless they're forced to do it. But from the perspective of someone who's low vision and who's getting these links, honestly, I'm just gonna, technology aside, again, since I'm not as familiar with this, my recommendation is more, read the email, what it has to say, and don't click on anything. You recommend to those people that they don't click on links from those kind of emails, and just open up the browser, which is a kind of a recommendation I made as well for everybody as well too. But it's that area is not my forte, so I may not be the best person to answer in terms of actually setting it up. But again, just from a security perspective, I would say anyone, whether they're low vision or what have you, try to avoid clicking on links that come from unsolicited emails.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
We have Tracy. Tracy, you have a question? I see your hand is raised.
Yes, can you hear me okay? Okay,
Yes.
I'm on my cell phone also. My question is, we have a small company. My husband is an inventor from Sweden and has invented a number of things that are used internationally and by medical and military organizations. And the problem we've had since day one is we are not techie at all. And the problem is we hire people to be in IT. Is there any sort of regulatory agency, any consultants, any resources that there can be someone that just kind of looking over the things that the IT admin person is doing so that he's not a person? I mean, we hope that every employee you ever have is a great guy, but is there any agency or are there consultants that can be just peek over the shoulder a little bit and see, because we ourselves are not, we're good at the thing that we're doing, but as far as IT, absolutely not. So how would we know that our IT guy isn't harvesting all the IP and selling it to our competitor, for example?
It's a really good question. And honestly, there's a component. The answer to that is there's a component of having someone watch the watcher. So
Yes.
it may be useful for you, for example, to have two different IT firms, both that specialize in security, and to essentially have them audit and check the work of the other ones, because in a sense they have something to, they're competing with each other, and they have something to be, they want to catch the other company doing something bad anyway, so they have incentive to make sure that that company hasn't done something like that. And I would say there are specific companies that do as well, that do IT penetration tests. And like when I'm working at a company, they will, if my account is doing something, they can see that. That's all being audited. All of that, by the way, is you want to have a system that can't be modified as well too. There's these systems called SIEMs, SIEM. It's an acronym. It's security, intelligence, and event management platform. And basically, what they do is they take all the logs out of your environment and they store them in a centralized place that very few people can access. And so that way, if somebody does do something, you can see what they're doing. So you can see, like the stuff that I showed in that demo, you can see them sharing or dumping content out, and that gets put into the SIEM. And then again, if there's a different IT company that's controlling the SIEM than the other one, for example, that's a way to provide some controls in that. And incidentally, I actually know several really, really good consultants in Stockholm. So if you do need recommendations, let me know. There are a few really, really good companies that I highly trust and I've worked with for over 15 years. Actually spoke first at one of the guys' events in Stockholm. That was around, I think, 13 years ago or so. So if you need specific recommendations of IT people that work in Stockholm or work in other parts of Sweden, let me know.
I am absolutely very, very interested, and I will contact you. And the other question I have, we are actually, all the problems began, we moved to a small town west of Chicago, and that's when all the problems have begun since then. As long as we were in Sweden, everything was good, but it's gone not as well in the States. So
yeah,
do you know anybody here?
Yeah, I mean, we do. I mean, reach out to me, and I can get you in contact with some other folks as well. I do know some Chicago area people that I can trust. And sometimes also check your vendor trail and check who all has access to the data and all the databases and things like that. Some form of an IT audit might be useful. In some cases, by the way, depending on the circumstances, you may want to look at a managed security services provider company, or an MSSP, and those companies will also sit on top of things, and they can kind of watch for nefarious activities, and they can monitor. You have to pay for it, but in most cases, I find that they're highly valuable because they again, they have incentives to not mess up their customer data. They have multiple customers. It's not just one small little shop that you don't know what their incentives are. And they could be that third-party tool. So an MSSP, I do know some good MSSPs as well that I've worked with. So contact me, and I'm happy to provide that information.
Thank you so much. Okay, that's amazing. Thanks. Loved your presentation. It was amazing. My husband watched the whole thing. He never watches anything like this. Loved it.
You just tell him to talk if he's Swedish, right?
Yes.
Tusen talk, I think it is.
All righty. Yes. Perfect. Tack så mycket. Hej då.
To hear that. Okay, we'll move to Hector and then Marina. You still have to fall in line, Marina.
Hi, Michael, and hi, Vivian. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have me a question. So, first of all, I work in Noel. It's a biotech company here in Menlo Park, and we got compromised on Monday by a service called it's Employee Portal. The name is let me tell you the name. They just changed the name. It used to be, oh my God, sorry about that. It's called, hold on. Oh, well, it's a employee portal where we have our social security numbers, our pay stubs, and everything. And we just got access to the portal since Monday. So what do you recommend us to do?
So you're saying your employee portal that includes like all your social security numbers and things like that, that got accessed?
Yes, it's a second-hand vendor. It's not on site. We pay for the service, and we get paid through that service.
So in theory, it's the company that's hosting that data that's the one responsible. So in this case, at least according to the California law that that revolves around this. So in theory, they're the ones that need to say, hey, mea culpa, this was our fault, and they need to contact all of the people. I don't know if they've already done that in your case. Have they contacted you, or did you find out about this?
Excuse me, what's the question?
How did you? I mean, did the company that's hosting this, did this employee portal company that you pay for, did they contact you about this, or did you find out about it and then?
Everybody were sharing information in Slack, saying that we didn't have access company-wide to these. It's called Prism. They bought different companies and they fuse everything together. So they have now like different ones in one. Yeah. And they got compromised over the weekend. So nobody had access to punch their time in and time outs. And we found that over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is I'm not a lawyer, so I'd say definitely contact legal in terms of that thing, because it is fairly significant. But my understanding is there may be some requirements that you need to comply with in terms of notifications and in terms of providing services. But I'm not sure if that's you that has to do that, or if it's the company that's that actually had the compromise with. It's an unfortunate circumstance. We trust some of these third-party outside companies to be able to provide these services, and then they get hacked, or they lose those. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, I think the people who information has got compromised probably need to know about it and need to go through, again, either credit monitoring or credit locking, which is, again, something I recommend. But definitely as well, like I said, since I'm not a lawyer, I'd say contact someone at legal, see what their recommended approach is.
Thank you very much. We will take this advice. And by the way, really nice presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
We have cybersecurity. I never talked to them, but you pretty much spoke for my own colleagues.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Marina, your turn.
So one of the chats, somebody asked how they can lock their social security number from credit companies.
So this is again the these three credit companies don't want you to do this, so they make it a little bit more challenging. Because even when you do, they do this thing called search engine optimization. So when you search for credit locks, it actually directs you to their credit monitoring services. But what you're doing is you're freezing your credit. It's a credit freeze or credit lock. They have to make it available on their site, but they make it difficult to get to. So in the past, for example, I would find the link and then I would share it with someone once I found it. But then, of course, they got smart and they kept changing the links where the links were. So, in short, look for credit freeze. I think is the best way to look for it. And if it's something that you're paying for every month, it's not a credit freeze. You want to find the one that actually walks you through it and says, are you sure you want to do this? You really want to get rid of all the benefits of getting junk mail all the time asking you to sign up for credit cards? I mean, that's not what they say, but that's effectively what they mean. But go to TransUnion's website. It's on their website. Go to Experian's website. Go to Equifax is the third one. Go to Equifax's website, equifax.com, Experian.com, transunion.com, and look there for the credit freeze site. It might take you a while to find it, but once you do, you can go through and lock down you can lock it down or unlock it. Just remember to save, of course, your PIN within your password management suite that you're using. Hopefully you are after all this, so that you don't keep yourself locked for an inordinate amount of time.